All right, welcome back to ABA exam review in our BCBA practice exam series. This is exam 6, and we're going through the next set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack and study guides and practice exams. As always, when you pass, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. 114. You, a behavior analyst, ask a technician to assist with an assessment virtually through Zoom. You instruct the parent to place the camera so that it focuses on the child, and you ask the technician to take duration data on how long the child engages with different items in the room. What type of assessment does this likely describe? Your job in this question, because we always start with what does the question ask, is to identify the type of assessment that you are doing. Now remember, we're always looking for the best answer and the most accurate answer based on the information given. In this case, you're asking a technician to assist with an assessment through Zoom. You tell the parent, place the camera on the child, and you ask the technician to take duration data on how long the child engages with different items in the room. So immediately right there, you should be thinking preference assessment. And why? Well, because we're taking data on the child engaging with different items. We're trying to figure out what interests the child, which doesn't interest the child, and we can use that later on to conduct other types of assessments. So in this case, we're predicting some sort of preference assessment. So we have to ask ourselves, what type of preference assessment is this describing? Well, let's think about our different preference assessments. We have a single choice, a forced choice, multiple stimulus, and a free operant. With the single choice, forced choice, and multiple stimulus, we're contriving it. We're controlling how many stimuli they can respond to. We're controlling everything about the assessment. In this case, we're just watching as the child engages with items in the room. Much more naturalistic, much more associated with free operant. So we're predicting that this is a free operant preference assessment. So a functional analysis. With a functional analysis, we're manipulating antecedents and consequences to identify functions. Not what we're doing here, right? We're looking at the child engaging with items and taking data on that. So we look at B, free operant preference assessment. Well, that's what we predicted. And as you get better at the exam, you want to try and predict answers. Even if you don't predict the right answer, that process is going to develop these critical thinking skills and make you more fluent. B looks good. Always read all of your answer choices. C, multiple stimulus preference assessment. Now, what's the difference here? Well, with the multiple stimulus preference assessment, you are controlling how many stimuli the learner can engage with. Meaning you're picking, let's say, 5 items or 7 items. In this case, there's no set number. We're just watching as the child engages with different items in the room. So it's free operant as opposed to this controlled multiple stimulus. And then how about D, a free operant reinforcer assessment? Well, remember, it's important that a preference assessment and a reinforcer assessment, two different things. Preference assessments lead to reinforcer assessments because with preference assessments, whatever the child prefers, we can then use those items in reinforcer assessments. But preference assessments don't themselves identify reinforcers. What we're doing here, we're just figuring out what is the child engaging with. It's a free operant preference assessment. 115, Jason receives a quarter each time he fills his Bluey token board, but at no other time. He then gets to put the quarter into his piggy bank. Today, Jason saw 3 quarters sitting on the counter, so he picked them up and put them in his piggy bank. Which answer choice is most similar to the quarters that Jason got from the counter? So let's think about this. We are worried about the quarters that Jason got from the counter. So in what context is Jason getting these quarters? Well, we know he gets a quarter whenever he fills his Bluey token board, but at no other time. So he's getting these quarters as reinforcement for the token board completion, but at no other time. So in order to get the quarters, he has to fill that token board. Today, however, there are 3 quarters sitting on the counter, so he grabbed them and put them in his piggy bank. He did not engage in the contingency. He did not engage in the required response, yet he still received reinforcement. So what do we call it when somebody gets reinforcement, even though they don't engage in the target response or the contingency? A, behavior contrast. Well, behavior contrast says when a behavior increases or decreases in one environment, there's a tendency for it to increase or decrease in the other environment if nothing about that other environment changes. Not what we're looking at here, right? We're worried about this reinforcement of the 3/4. We look at B, bootleg reinforcement. This is what we're talking about. Bootleg reinforcement occurs when reinforcement is gained or provided without the learner engaging in the target response or contingency. In this case, Jason got quarters even though he never filled his token board. It's bootleg reinforcement. What's not negative reinforcement? C, right? Because he gained the quarters, nothing was taken away. And inadvertent reinforcement, you could probably describe it like that, right? If we wanted to use less jargony. But on our exam, you want to use jargon, right? You want to be technical. You want the best answer. And the best, most accurate answer is going to be B, bootleg reinforcement. You are observing a behavior technician utilize a verbal prompt with their client. The target behavior is identifying numbers. The client appears to be learning the skill, but you aren't ready to get rid of the verbal prompt yet, although you want to see if the client can do it without the prompt. What might you recommend? That would be non-intrusive. A lot of different things going on in this question. First, we're going to recommend something that is non-intrusive. And when we talk about prompts that are non-intrusive, what do we mean by that? Well, the less the prompt is intrusive, the lower on the hierarchy is. Meaning, if we're going least to most, those least prompts are relatively non-intrusive, right? Verbal and gesture and movements. However, an intrusive prompt would be more along the lines of a physical prompt or a modeling prompt. So when it says we want something that's not intrusive, well, we want to avoid things like physical and modeling prompts, which are higher on the hierarchy and more intrusive. Now, additionally, the client appears to be learning the skill, which is good, but you don't want to get rid of the verbal prompt yet. Meaning, you don't want to fade the prompt just yet, but you want to see, can the client do it without the prompt? What can we do here? Well, let's look at A, shifting to a graduated guidance procedure. Well, graduated guidance is a type of physical prompting, and we want to be non-intrusive, so we can eliminate A on that basis. B, most to least prompting. Again, we're trying to be non-intrusive. That's why everything in the question you need to consider, right? Use all the information given. We want to be non-intrusive. We don't want to go to most to least because we're at verbal prompting right now, which is a very unintrusive type of prompt. C, remove the prompt completely. And why wouldn't you do that? Well, the question says you aren't ready to get rid of the verbal prompt. This question is a good example of why you really want to understand everything about the question first before going to the answer choices, because there are a lot of different variables in the question which are helping us eliminate answer choices. If you read too quickly, though, you might choose remove the prompt completely, missing the part where you don't want to get rid of the prompt. That leaves us with D, implement a prompt delay. And a prompt delay is when you give the SD, you wait a certain amount of time before you prompt. And with a prompt delay, you're able to see, can the client do the behavior or the skill without a prompt? If they can't, you can still prompt. So in this case, the technician might say, identify 7, wait 5 seconds, which is the prompt delay, and then prompt. So they're getting the best of both worlds. They can see, can the client do it without the prompt? If they can't, they can still prompt because you aren't ready to get rid of it. So what might you recommend? I would recommend implementing a prompt delay. 117. Through parent training, the Washington family has improved significantly at reinforcing behaviors they want to see, but putting other behaviors on extinction. However, even though the family reinforces asking politely for a snack, they will still occasionally reinforce crying for a snack, so crying still occurs, although much less frequently. What might explain this? So, question is asking what explains this. So let's identify this. Well, this is the crying is still occurring, although much less frequently. And why is that happening? Because we know the Washington family is getting better at differential reinforcement, right? Reinforcing and extinction. However, even though they've been reinforcing the right behavior, asking politely, they still sometimes reinforce as crying for a snack, therefore crying still occurs. So let's sum that up. Essentially, you've got two behaviors competing for reinforcement right now. asking politely, and crying. Asking politely is getting reinforced more than crying, but crying is still occurring. And why is that? Well, because of something we call matching law. Matching law says behaviors will typically occur as frequently as they receive reinforcement. So of course, asking politely for a snack is going to occur a lot more because it's reinforced a lot more. But since they still reinforce crying some, you might still see crying occasionally happen. So because of matching law, the crying is still contacting reinforcement, just less frequently, therefore it's occurring less frequently. B, behavior contrast. Again, behavior contrast involves two different environments, right? As far as we know, we're in the same environment here. We're not really talking about different environments. B is out. C, maturation. With maturation, it's more of an experimental design idea, right? How a subject changes over time through experimental designs. And then D, grandma's law. Grandma's law, or the Premack principle, is when we give the opportunity to engage in a highly preferred response or high probability response as reinforcement for engaging in a low probability. In summary, right, matching law is the only one that fits. Behavior contrast, maturation, and grandma's law really has nothing to do with this particular question. This is a good question testing your fluency. If you're fluent in all four terms, this should be very, very simple. 118, Marcus wears special running socks that keep his feet in the right position as he runs through his neighborhood. The socks are not very comfortable for everyday use. However, so whenever he gets home, he takes his socks off and his feet are no longer uncomfortable. What consequences is represented relative to taking socks off? So we have a consequence question, punishment, or reinforcement. So let's break it down. We're looking at Marcus's behavior relative to taking the socks off. So we know he wears running socks as he runs. However, the socks are not comfortable. So he gets home, and what does he do? He takes his socks off, and as a result, as a consequence, he's no longer uncomfortable. What has happened? Well, the uncomfortableness has been removed. And every time he gets home, he takes his socks off. So we know that behavior continues in the future. So let's think about that. We are removing something as a consequence, the uncomfortableness, which makes this negative. And it's continuing, increasing, or maintaining the behavior in the future, making it reinforcement. So taking the socks off, the consequence for taking his socks off, he removes the uncomfortableness, making it negative, and then it increases or maintains this behavior in the future, making it reinforcement. Consequence questions, as straightforward as that. Are you adding something or removing something? Is the behavior increasing or decreasing? Put them together, you've got your answer. 119, a preschool teacher hands one of her learners a green bear and says, go put it in the green bucket, and the learner does. The teacher asks the same learner to do a jumping jack, and the learner does. The learner is demonstrating what? So we're looking at the learner here, right? And in the context of the question, the learner is being told by the preschool teacher to do things. First, go put it in the green bucket, which the learner complies with. The teacher then says, do a jumping jack. The learner complies. Now, we have two schools of thought here, right? Or two types of languages, so to speak. We have expressive language and receptive language. Expressive language is communication, okay? What you're saying vocally, right? Receptive language is the ability to follow instructions, follow spoken language. Compliance, you might say, okay? In this case, we're looking at the learner's behavior, and what are they doing? Well, they're complying, they're following instructions. That is receptive. And we know we have receptive here, right, in C. Now, what do we mean by listener behavior? Well, in a lot of cases, listener behavior is now replacing receptive language. It's the same idea with listener behavior, right? You have a speaker and the listener is engaging in what the speaker says, okay? In this case, the listener behavior is putting in the green bucket and doing a jumping jack. So listener behavior and receptive language skills are essentially the same. So by doing all these compliance drills, essentially, right, or following these instructions, the learner is demonstrating both listener behavior and receptive language skills, making the answer with B and C. Ms. Jackson taught her class to quiet down each time she knocks 3 times on her desk using differential reinforcement. Each year, Ms. Jackson gets a new class and must redo the knocking intervention. Prior to intervention, the knocking is considered a what? So let's think about this. We're looking at the knocking, and we're looking at the knocking prior to intervention. We know that Ms. Jackson teaches her class to quiet down each time she knocks 3 times. She creates a discriminative stimuli, right? The knocking becomes the SD for evoking quiet down because it produces, I should say, reinforcement. Okay, the class, when they quiet down after she knocks 3 times, they get reinforced, thus making the knocking an SD. However, when she gets a new class, she must redo the intervention because they don't know it yet, right? The new class has never had the intervention. The knocking means nothing to them because they've never been reinforced in the presence of the knocking. So prior to the intervention, what is the knocking considered? A discriminative stimulus. Discriminative stimulus, or the knocking is a discriminative stimulus after the intervention, right? Because you have to create it, you have to make the knocking an SD. Prior to the intervention, they've never been reinforced in the presence of the knocking, making it a stimulus delta. A stimulus delta is just a stimulus where the response has never been reinforced in the presence of that stimulus. It's not a motivating operation, right? Because we're creating a stimulus, discriminative stimulus here. Prior to intervention, it's a stimulus delta. And it's not a reinforcer because it's an antecedent. So prior to intervention, the knocking is considered a stimulus delta. Thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe for all of our updates. Check out behavioranalyststudy.com. Spread the word about ABA exam review. If we're helping you out in any way, we really appreciate it. As always, let us know when you pass. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.